Hello, and welcome to Season 6, Episode 4 of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. I'm Bekah, and this is a podcast that features members of the Virtual Coffee community. Virtual Coffee is an intimate group of developers at all stages of their coding journey, and they're here on this podcast sharing their stories and what they've learned. We're here to share it with you. Here with me today is my co-host, Dan.
What up, Beck? How's it going?
It's going wonderfully.
Excellent. Today we are talking with Sadie J, who is a front-end developer with a federal agency. We talked about her long experience doing the interview process, and her experience working at a government agency as well.
Yeah, it was really interesting to hear how she kind of started in tech, she burnt out and left tech for a while and then decided to give it a second shot, and she's back doing it again. And it sounds like she's really excited, but also like took those lessons that she learned from that burnout experience and brought them with her so she doesn't get burnt out again. And I think that's really, really useful because I see that happen to a lot of people.
Yeah, totally. It was interesting hearing her talk about her thought process, and when she was experiencing the burnout stuff, and just taking a break like that, and dealing with it head on. I think it was really cool. I think there's a lot of valuable stuff in there.
Yep. And we start every episode of the podcast like we start every virtual coffee. We introduce ourselves with our name, where we're from, what we do, and a random check-in question. And we hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, I'm Bekah. I am a technical community builder from a small town in Ohio, and an imaginary class that I wish was offered. I feel like this is hard because I'm not sure what would be practical for an imaginary class, and maybe imaginary classes aren't practical.
Did the imaginary class teach imaginary things, or is this like a chance to learn,
Oh, for sure. It can teach
magic or whatever?
imaginary things. Yeah. I think I would like to definitely take a class that watches people have brain scans. And that's not an imaginary class, some kind of like neurobiology class. But there's got to be some kind of imaginary aspect to brain scans and people. I'm really bad at this question. I was the one that chose it too, so it just like makes it worse. I'm just gonna like look at people's brains and see what they do. That's it. It's not imaginary. It's wishful. That's what I wish. I wish to watch people's brains.
Less of a class and more of a profession you wish you had.
Yes, I would love to be a neurobiologist. That would be fantastic. Well, okay, maybe an imaginary class on like studying black holes by like actually physically exploring them, because that's not possible. So is that better?
I don't know. I don't know what to do with this question. Hi, I'm Dan. I do computer development things in Cleveland. And imaginary class. I don't really understand this question, to tell you the truth. I don't know. I guess I'm gonna go with like spaceship flying. Yeah. But like not the boring ones that we have in our reality, though, we're like Star Wars
spaceship flying.
Yeah, like
that's
teach me how
a good
to fly
imaginary class.
the Millennium Falcon or something, that'd be cool.
Yeah,
as long as I actually got to fly it. All right, that's gonna be my answer.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sadie. I'm from a small town in the Panhandle of Florida. I am a front-end developer for a federal agency. And an imaginary class I think I would take, I don't know. This makes me think of like when I was in elementary school and like super obsessed with like ESP and like being psychic and things like that. So I would probably pick some class that develops like your psychic abilities. Yeah.
I
Ooh, I
think
like that.
that is a good, an
Yeah.
excellent answer. You have definitely won this round of intro questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, my
Well,
first answer was going to be like learn the force,
Ooh.
Then
that's a
then I
good
was thinking
one.
about spaceships would be fun too, so and a little more practical. I was worried that I think that
I was
canonically you have to like have the be able to use the force to learn. Like it's not like everybody can learn it. It'd be a bummer to sign up for that class and they get there and then find out
Right. You're
can't
ineligible.
can't right.
you can watch everybody else use
Yeah.
the force, but you're stuck.
Right, right.
You missed a
But I feel like
prerequisite.
everybody can use or learn how to fly spaceships.
I feel like I want a class on communicating with aliens, but I feel like DARPA already has that or something. Like it's out there, we just don't know about it yet. Um, well, welcome, Sadie. Thanks for being here with us today. We're very, very excited to have you. And we always like to start off with your tech origin story. So, how did you get to this point in your tech journey?
Ooh, wow. Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like it was a winding journey for sure. Like I didn't really grow up with a desire to be in tech. Like my household computer was just the computer that let me get on cartoonnetwork.com and play games. Like it wasn't much past that. But I would say right after I graduated um with my bachelor's degree in psychology, I got into drawing and painting. Like, and this was just like a random desire that I had. I was like, I just want to learn painting. Just gonna take a class. So I did and like fell in love. And from that, I wanted to like find a career that let me combine psychology and like drawing or visual arts. So I was like, okay, maybe web design somehow, because that would also let me work remotely and give me some flexibility. So I went to a boot camp. I went to Skill Crush and signed up for one of their courses. It was like a web design course or visual design course. This was back in like 2017, like several years ago. But I wanted to like test out the waters to see if that was something I would be interested in. And like it seemed good enough. Like I felt like I could do it. So then I signed up for my master's, um, specializing in web design and online communication. And in that program, like we did both web design and also web development. And I realized that like actually web development was more my thing and not so much the web design. Um, so yeah, so that was like the kickoff to my tech journey for sure. But after I graduated, there was another pivot. Like I was completely burnt out on tech and anything tech related. Like I couldn't bear to think about like coding. And I remember like I applied to some internship and got Elite Code Challenge, but at the time I didn't know what that was. So I was like, oh wow, I just graduated with this degree and like I can't even use it. Like I don't know what like how to do this thing with JavaScript that they want me to do. So it just completely like demoralized me and like crushed my confidence. So I became a yoga teacher. I was out in Brooklyn and doing that like yoga life and
Also,
like meeting with cool people. And then I got into the travel industry and did that for a year. But all of that ended around 2020 when I left the job and then the pandemic started and all that. So it gave me time to reflect. And I had to move back home after being in Brooklyn for a few years. And I really thought, I was like, okay, what am I going to do next? Because, like, I don't want to be here, like Florida, which is home for me. Like, I don't want to be here forever, but I do want to take the time to, like, make sure that, like, I'm going in a direction that I feel good about. And kind of came to the conclusion that, like, I didn't really give tech a try. Like, I let the burnout like kind of like take over. I don't know, I guess like my direction or just like I don't know, just had me stop in my tracks. So I was like, well, you know what, I'm gonna give this a college try. Like I'm gonna do this again, and this time I'm going to make sure I have community around me, and that's how I found y'all, I found virtual coffee. So I restarted my bootcamp, restarted Skill Crush, and did the front end developer intensive. But this time was very intentional about joining community, like being very active in virtual coffee, and I wanted to do the open source thing. So it would just so happen that the kickoff for the Hacktoberfest um, month was like a week or two away. So that's when I joined Virtual Coffee, and I got to sit in and watch Dan do the like how to contribute to open source, and yeah, so it all just went from there. Yeah, so I ended up like contributing to like 5 projects, and like I contributed to a couple of IBM projects. I got to do a demo day with them, and then started the job search uh, in like February, and that was another beast of its own, where it took like 9 weeks and just hundreds of applications to get this job that I have now. Yeah, that's how I got here. Yeah.
That's
Oh, that's
awesome. I love that
yeah.
story. There's just um I like that you have gone through a lot of different journeys on this journey here, right? You've done a lot
Absolutely.
of different things, but also like coming back from burnout. I imagine that's got to be kind of a hard decision to make. What really kind of pushed you in that direction? Like, okay, fine, I'm going to do this one more time.
Right. That's a good question. I think one time helped because I had graduated 2018, and then I felt like I could entertain the thought of tech again, like what, few years later, so 2021. So really it was just time and space that helped, I would say, for the most part. But also, I don't know, I wanted flexibility in my job and like where I worked. Like that was also the catalyst of going into the master's degree program. So like I think that thread just continued, and I was like, okay, I think I could do tech again, because I've tried like I also tried writing on the side a little bit, but that didn't feel quite as a fit. So I think just I don't know, the reflection and wanting to like challenge myself and see something to completion also helped.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience? So if I have this right, you did the boot camp and then you
Hmm.
went to a master's program after that.
Hmm. I did,
So that's
yeah.
like a lot of school, like, all together.
Yeah.
Can you talk? I don't think we've talked to anybody who has learned web design stuff or web development stuff in a master's program.
Hmm.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about what that was like?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
especially like compared to, since you did it right after the boot camp, maybe
Mhm.
compared to what it was like,
Right.
you know, the different approaches and everything.
Yeah. So okay. So I did the boot camp, and I don't even know if I completed the course. Um, like before I did the masters, like it was just enough to be like, okay, this seems like something I could do. So I went into my master's program without any knowledge of code or anything, but that was the like the setup for the degree. Like you didn't have to have any prior knowledge. Um, but I don't know. I kind of don't know how to like give more details because it like college. Like you like we had 4 classes a semester. That's what I signed up for, and like the very first class was like a web design principles, and like it went into HTML and maybe a little bit of CSS. And I don't even think we touched JavaScript that much in that first class. And then it built up from there. We learned like it was mostly manipulation because it wasn't like a computer science class, so we didn't learn like algorithms or data structures or anything like that. But basically, like how to create websites and like web pages with an eye for design. Um, we also learned like Adobe Suite and um, social media and like analytics for websites and things like that.
Hmm.
Like the capstone project was to create a WordPress site for a local company, and our cohort was divided up into teams, and that was like that was the peak, like the end of the program. But I say all that to say, like, so I did that, finished in 2018, and then went back into the boot camp 2021. And I I feel like I retained enough information, but it was enough to know that, like, oh yeah, I remember learning that in school. So I felt like what I learned in the boot camp and what I learned in school were comparable, but it was just that I had more time in school to learn the things and to like kind of like dive into each thing that was taught, like each aspect of HTML or CSS or JavaScript. Whereas the boot camp was like basically the same topics, but just in a more condensed time space, even though it was self-paced. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah,
So
guess that makes sense.
the so after you did the master's program, then you went
Hmm.
into the boot camp.
Hmm.
Was there any interview prep that you did as part of the master's program, or did you do that in the your
No.
face said no?
Yeah, no. For the master's program, absolutely not. And I feel like that's why like I was so blindsided by the Leak Code challenge. But yeah, what the like real world um aspect of the boot camp, or not the boot camp, of the master's degree was like a internship. So I did an internship at American Documentary POV, a media company, and I'm smiling because like I don't, y'all can't see me, but I'm smiling, and, and I'm laughing because like it was an internship in the digital team, but it didn't have anything to do with like the website or anything. So I had to like shoehorn like, hey, I need to do something with WordPress. I need to do something. But what it ended up being was more like me working with the producers and doing like other cool stuff. But yeah, no, that was the extent of like the real world application for the master's program. So I was like completely lost when I was job hunting and uh, yeah.
I think most people are completely lost when they're hunting. It's just like there's not a lot of preparation and job interviews are all over the place. So you just never know what to expect. And like having to prepare so much for each one of them makes it really, really hard. Did you do interview prep with Skill Crush?
I did, yeah. So the front end developer intensive includes a job hunting coach, like a career coach that helps you like prepare your resume and like prepare your cover letter and get your like 1 minute like uh what's it called? Like a 1 minute like spiel about yourself and I don't know, just interview practice and how to answer
Elevator pitch.
questions. Exactly, elevator pitch. Um yeah, so Skill Crush had that and that really opened my eyes to like how to be strategic when job hunting and like kind of like understand what to expect when interviewing in the tech field. And yeah, without that, I really don't think I would have, uh, or it either would have taken me a lot longer to find my job, or I would have stopped again and probably would have said maybe tech's just not for me.
Yeah, and that's so unfortunate that there are so many people trying to break into tech and are just quitting before they get there because the interview process is not reflective of most of the stuff that you're going to be doing.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. And like without that knowledge of like, oh, like I actually don't maybe need to know how to like do this leak codey thing. Like if you don't have that understanding, then like I feel like that's what feels like the tutorial loop where like, oh, I need to know how to do this weird niche thing. Or like maybe I actually don't know enough, so I need to keep going. Like I don't know, the interview process is so like demoralizing, or it can be.
That's a really good word for it. I even think like some of the best interview processes are still very exhausting and tough to get through. So, why don't can you walk us through what it was like to prepare for an interview?
Ooh, that's a good question. um, I, that's a good question. I feel like what I did would be to like look at the job website and like look at the people that I'm interviewing with and like kind of stalk their Instagram or not Instagram. their LinkedIn. I don't know why I said Instagram. But yeah, stalk their LinkedIn a little bit and try to find like some sort of commonality that I may have with them and have the idea to bring it up, even though like I'm uh, really shy and I probably won't ever bring up like, hey, I looked at your LinkedIn and I noticed like I'm not that kind of person. But just having that like background behind that person that I'm going to be interviewing um, helped me feel a little more confident. I would also try to gather a few questions. A VC or Jennifer, I don't remember how to say her last name, but she has a list of questions to ask during an interview, like to the interviewer to try and gauge like your fit with the role and the company. And I would like go back to that page and like pick out questions for every single interview that I had to make sure that like, okay, this is what I need to know about this role and about the company to make sure that I'm going to fit with them. So in order to make it a process of like I'm also interviewing the interviewer, like it's not just me. It's a two-way thing that I need to also be a fit and they need to be a fit with me.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it can get lost sometimes, especially I don't know, on long journeys, on long, struggles. But I, so I was going to ask that made me think, did you run into any, you said you were doing this for so long, and how
Mhm.
many did you say you did? How many interviews did you say?
It
I
was
can't remember how many,
at
but like a
least
lot, right?
it was a lot of interviews for sure. It was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
250 applications and
Yeah. Wow.
yeah.
And so like were there, I mean, you don't have to like call them out or anything, but were there any times where were you got down the road a little bit and were like, "Oh, I don't know if this is actually a good fit for me," on your side?
Right. That's a good question. There's been a few times I would say, but even when that happened, I would try to go into it thinking like, okay, this is interview practice, or like say I got to take home or some like technical test. I would say, okay, this may be out of my wheelhouse, but I'm still going to give X amount of time to it just to see what I could learn from this like take home or from this interview or from this interaction that I can then hopefully improve the next time I have an interview.
Mm, I think that's a awesome attitude. We've had several people suggest like taking interviews even when you're not actively looking for jobs sometimes to do that practice because it's just like you both were saying it's so hard and emotionally hard and also just like intellectually hard. And I feel, I mean, interviewing is absolutely a skill that is separate from everything else, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
And like any skill, I think you can get better at it with practice. But I love that attitude that you have. I mean, it's just like, okay, this might not be perfect or whatever, but I'm still going to go through and build up the skills or whatever.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really hard. Even that idea of like practicing an interview, like going on practice interviews, I find to be incredibly overwhelming
Mm.
to I have to mentally prepare myself, and I'm trying to, like, make that shift in mindset of, what there aren't stakes here, I'm not being judged, this is practice to learn something, and try and flip it kind of like how you said, where you're interviewing the company as well, because it might not be a good fit, and I would say, like, that's some of the most advice that I give to people who are interviewing for their first job. They're like, "Oh, well, what do you think about this?" Like, that's a red flag. I wouldn't go through that, and I think maybe as I identify what red flags are, I will say the more I interview, the more I'm able to identify what flags are because I put
Mm.
myself in situations where I'm like, "This is great," and then I'm like, "This is not great," and I should have been able to figure this out before I got into this position.
Mm.
Um, so at least, like, keeping track of that maybe feels like, "All right, this is progress, I'm learning something, and now next time, I'm never gonna interview for anything ever again. I've decided well, I'm starting my own company next because
Nice.
I don't wanna have to go through that, but if in the off chance I do have to go through it, I really want to approach it with, "I'm interviewing you first,"
Mhm.
and that kind of, like, changes the power dynamic in the situation, and I think kind of alleviates some of that stress that you get going into those interviews where it's like somebody is staring at me right now. Well, like, hey, I'm staring right back at you, buddy. So,
Right. Exactly.
so how long did you prep for your interviews?
Um, that's a good question. It would depend. Like, I know when I was first starting out my job hunting process, I would be really diligent about, okay, I'm gonna like make sure I have my list of questions ready, make sure I like review the website, make sure I look at everybody and all this stuff. But the more I got like used to interviewing, I would say the less I actually like sat down and prepped for the interviews. Which I don't know if I would recommend or not, but I don't know. I guess I got just more comfortable like being in that space of, okay, this is the thing that we're doing. Like we're both trying to gauge whether or not we're a fit, and we'll see what happens from there. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I love that. It shows that
Uh,
you're gaining confidence as you go forward and you've done these practices. So,
mm,
um, that's more, I think that, that's also one of those issues where people who are continually interviewing are just pushing themselves so hard to do this prep over and over and over. And that also kind of leads to that situation of like you talked about, like burning out in tech. There's definitely that burnout in the interview process. And so sometimes you have to take a break. And the other part
mm,
of that is like when you're interviewing so much, you don't have time to be working on like
yeah,
personal projects or other things. It's like a full-time job.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that was one of the tips that I got um while job hunting and with the career coach was that like you can like stop trying to keep up with personal projects. Like this is what you need to be doing, and like once you secure your job, then you can start your personal projects back up and be like getting paid for it. But yeah, like the idea was that like you could do both, but like you're probably better off not, so you can completely focus on like your time and energy on interviewing, and then when you're not interviewing, you can like be off and like live your life. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea too of like giving yourself permission. You can have
Mhm,
permission. It's okay to not be working
mhm,
on these personal projects. And I
mhm,
even think that it's okay to take a break from interviewing.
mhm,
I know that people feel like they're losing momentum or they're not ever going to be able to find the next interview if they're not doing it all the time. But, if you're burning yourself out before you start, then you're going to start burnt out too. And
mm,
that's not where you want to be.
mm, mm. Very true.
So, as you were looking for a job,
Yeah.
what was your method of applying? Were you applying? Were you reaching out to people personally? What kind of was the right direction for you?
Ooh, that's a great question. First I started off just applying. So think I started off using like LinkedIn and maybe just LinkedIn at first, but then I started getting more plugged into like the different job sites, like Remotive and like different remote job boards because I knew I wanted to be remote. Um, then the further along I got into my like application groove, I started reaching out to hiring managers on LinkedIn and even like other engineers that were at companies that I saw were either hiring or that I thought would be interesting to work at. And from there, I would try to make a connection and be like, hey, like I'm looking for engineering roles, or I see that you have like a software engineer role open. Um, who should I talk to, basically? And so sometimes I wouldn't get a response, which is fine. But when I did get a response, it would um, usually I would get an interview and like be able to put a name to a face and like start a conversation. So that was also another thing that I learned that I feel like I would probably do more of would be to actually reach out to people on LinkedIn and like have a conversation as opposed to just applying or even not even apply. Cause I found that like sometimes I would apply to a job and like have the conversation with the hiring manager and then they would say, okay, maybe you're not so much of a fit for this role per se, but we have something coming down the pipeline that you may be a better fit for. And it just kind of opened my eyes of like, oh, like, wait a minute. Like, I just need to talk to people. Like, I feel like I unlocked a key. Like, I didn't know this before, but yeah, yeah, that was very eye opening.
So the people you were reaching out to,
Mm.
right, explain to me again, like how you were choosing who to reach out to.
So say I would find a role that was interesting. So I would then go into LinkedIn and search the company name and then like quote hiring or manager or director or something like some higher up or someone that's going to be in the like hiring panel or something. And then I'd pick someone
Mhm.
whose title matched and then reach out to them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you'd find a job opening on a board or something like that, and then
Mhm.
then you do some homework, and yeah, that's really cool. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's a great tip. I mean, and I think that's like I mean, aside from the sneakiness of it, it
Yeah.
seems like a really good, like connecting with people is almost always a good thing. You know what I mean? And like as long as I'm sure you are doing it sort of respectfully and with some
Mhm.
knowledge, and not just blasting out the same thing to everybody used, whatever,
Right.
a million
Right.
different people. Yeah, that's great. I love that idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
It personalizes it, right? Because
Mhm.
before you're a name on a sheet of a paper or an internet form or whatever, but now there's more. There's a face to it. There's a voice to who they're looking at. And then
Mhm.
hiring managers or whoever can make that connection like, oh, okay, I know this person.
Mhm.
Even if you haven't had an in-depth conversation, there's something about like, oh, I do. There is already a connection there that makes it you're already a half a step above in front of everybody else in that pile, and that can make the difference.
Mhm.
So is that the job that you're currently at? Did that start with you reaching out to somebody?
No, it's funny. I saw that job in like an email list. It's called Words of Mouth, I believe, and they post like all these cool jobs. But so I saw that one, and then I was about to reach out to someone when someone in my boot camp at Skill Crush was like, "Hey, you should apply to this job. Like we've been talking, and they think that you might be a great fit." So I was like, "Okay, like sweet. Like I just saw this job." So yeah, like it was again like that community connection of like, hey, like yeah, the community connection.
That's really
That
cool. So they
Mhm.
had already heard of you before you
Yeah.
even reached out. Nice. Isn't that
Yeah.
funny that the way that works out lots of times where you've done so many applications and stuff, and then this one that
Right.
actually works, like, came
Right.
about in some strange connection in some other
Yes.
way. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
awesome.
Exactly.
one of my favorite things is when people reach out to me and they're like, "Hey, do you know anybody that would be good for this job?" And then like I
Mm.
can like, "Yes, I do."
Yes.
I think, like, I'm about to maybe submit my 5th referral to somebody for
Right.
somebody at DRAM. I just, like eventually, somebody's gonna be a good fit, and I'm gonna help
Yes.
them find it?
Yeah, you never know, like, yeah, I I can only imagine or, like, even in being in that position of, like, someone having referred me, like, the gratitude, like, is immeasurable, so, yeah, you're doing amazing work, Becca.
Oh, thank you. I
It's
also
just like,
like
oh,
well,
go
I
ahead,
just wanna
Vic.
say too, when people reach out to me from the community and they're like, "Hey, I wanna apply to this job, would you mind, like, sending a DM on my behalf because I know you're connected with this person?"
Mhm,
And most times I do. Sometimes there are people that I'm like, "I've never been in a room with you or had a conversation with you prior to this point, so I just
mhm,
don't feel comfortable with that."
mhm,
But, if I know somebody, if I've even I would say there have been people that I probably haven't been in the same breakout room with, but
mhm,
would still recommend because I see how they interact with other people in Slack,
mhm,
or I've heard them talk to other people on a luncheon during a lunch and learn or something like that. And I'm like,
mhm,
yeah, that person is awesome. Like they're really patient or they're really
mhm,
knowledgeable or they're really great at teaching. And so I feel comfortable being able to pass that along. And so if somebody is looking and you do have a connection to a community member that has a connection, then it's okay to reach out to them and ask them for a recommendation. And I've even had people in the past when I was a teacher say, I need a recommendation. I wrote it already. Would you send this? I'm like,
Yes.
I'm going to change it up a little bit to put it in my voice, but I agree with everything you've said and it makes it
Yes.
easier on me. So sure, you know?
Yes.
I don't think that's cheating. I think it's just making it a little bit easier. And if the person feels comfortable sending it, then they will.
Exactly. And like you can say what you want to hype up about yourself and then have someone co-sign that. So yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Dan, you were going to say something and I interrupted you.
Yeah, what do you think it was? Mm, It was. Oh no, I was just gonna talk like harp about how networking, like having a network of people that you know and could trust is so important with all this stuff, because it's like that you found that reference and I've had people both knew they were hiring and asked me, hey, are you looking for like whatever you look for a job, or the same way as Becca, like, do you know anybody that would fit this role? Like we're looking to hire somebody. Um,
Mm,
it's that same kind of thing, and if um I love being able to help people, but also like I know like I have just having a network, I have this like large safety net almost,
mhm,
of if
mhm,
something fell apart or whatever, I know I have a bunch of people that I can like lean on for help and support and stuff in the future. So I don't know. It's cool. It's good stuff.
mhm.
I all of my job, all sorry. So I'm independent, but all of my like clients I've ever worked for are all word of mouth,
Well,
like connections of connections, stuff like that. And it's always the and I have I have a network of people that do my kind of work, and um, it's always those clients are always the ones that are like the best clients. You know what I mean? As
mm,
opposed to like the cold call ones are like where there's no connection at all before, and that's not to say it can never work, obviously, but and those like word of mouth connections are only come from building a like I hate using I don't know, the word network is like it's got like a bunch of weird connotations,
mhm,
because there's like a lot of bad ways to do networking,
mhm,
like I've never like actively been like, I'm gonna go network now, but that's what you end up with, at different communities and things. They really are a network. It's a good word that has been poisoned by I don't know
Bad
connotations of
people.
other things. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, that's all just to say. I don't know what it is just to say. Other than the community is important.
mhm.
Welcome to Virtual Coffee Podcast.
Well, and community is a great way to gain experience too, along with connections. I know there's a bunch of people that put virtual coffee experience on their resume. I actually interviewed for a job a couple of years ago, and while I was interviewing, they were like, "Oh yeah, somebody else from Virtual Coffee is interviewing too. We talked about in the interview." Like, I
Cute.
still don't know who that person is, but I'm like, "Huh, that's really interesting." I love it though. It's great. Like everybody is giving back to the community in some way. And like if the their experience doing the support that they do at Virtual Coffee leads to a job, I love it. I am 100% here for that.
Mhm.
No, okay, so you've gone on all these interviews, you've done all these things, and we talked about how tough the interview scene is in tech, but are there any like good interview stories that you have or experiences that you're like, well, I wouldn't mind having that one again?
Right. Yeah. Ooh. I think one that stood out to me was, I think it was a two-part. Like, the first interview was like me gathering a whole bunch of questions, and the space was set up that like this is your time to ask us any questions that you have. And so I was super excited about the role in the team. So I had like a whole list of like 40 questions, and I put it. It's really embarrassing now, but I put it up on GitHub and like uh created a repo of questions and shared it with them, and they're like, "Oh, this is so cool," and like a little intimidated now because you have all these questions prepared. But it worked out because I passed to the next round, and that next round was to present a project that I had been working on and kind of like talk to them about like the features or like why I built it, and have a discussion on like maybe how it could be improved and things like that. So I thought like it was super collaborative, and like I don't want to say low stakes, but it changed the dynamic because it wasn't like me getting a take home and then I had to get familiar with one of the directions that they want me to follow, and then also think of like, okay, how would I do this? And like it's not that, but it was a project that I had made and like was excited about and wanted to talk to other people about, and had an opportunity to see how they would collaborate with me on projects and like how they would give feedback. And I don't know, it just felt like a more like big picture view of the interviewer or of me. And so yeah, I would totally do that again. Like if all interviews could be like that.
That's really cool.
um
So it was to present some just any random project that you had been working on
mhm,
personally. Yeah, that's awesome. I
mhm.
love that idea
Yeah,
because it
me
gives
too.
you, yeah, it takes all the pressure off of the like learning some unfamiliar thing, and but you can still see having to present it like that lets you sort of show off how much you know, or what like the kinds of things you think about, your thinking processes, which is the kind of stuff that you really want to know when you're interviewing. Anyway, as like
Exactly.
an interviewer, you don't want to know. I mean, I've personally like it's like okay, there's like different skill levels. People might like nobody knows everything. People might have holes in their knowledge, but the thing that you're always looking for is like uh the ability to like think through problems and sort of be able to constructively like talk about things, right? And if you're talking about your own work, then you don't have to, then you don't have to have the whole step of like learning what it was and trying to guess what they were thinking or all that
Mhm.
stuff, right? You know what you were thinking, right? Or
Exactly.
like maybe maybe you remember what you were thinking, but
Exactly.
that's a great idea. I like that. I don't think I'm ever going to hire anybody, but I always like I love when I hear about things like that that are like a little bit different than everybody, than the usual thing. And I take notes of them, but um, yeah, that's nice. It's a cool one. Okay, so you said I'm going to jump all the way to the now times. You said you work for a
Okay.
federal agency and you do front
Mhm.
end development.
I
I
do.
think that's really interesting. So, are there? I guess my question is like,
Mm,
are you able to talk a little bit about what that's like working in a government agency, especially doing front end stuff? I mean, that makes me think of like rules and oh, you have to like a bunch of regulations you have to follow or something like that. And maybe that's not the
DARPA
case,
and
but like
aliens.
or Becca's gonna call DARPA and get the aliens coming. But I just like would like to hear about it. I'm just curious.
yeah, that's yeah. Yeah. So I just started in April, so I'm still trying to wrap up like what can I do and what can I do. But from my understanding that all federal websites need to follow a set of standards called the US Web Design Standard. And it's something that's created by, I believe, by 18F. They are like another, like, um, kind of like agency, not like agency, like big agency, but like they create the standards for websites across federal agencies, if I understand correctly. But anyways, the US web design system is kind of like Bootstrap, where you put your classes into the HTML to make sure that the website is accessible. So like button sizes and like screen sizes and media queries and things like that are all sort of set by these standards, and you just kind of drop it into the HTML. Um, yeah, I'm still trying to learn that, but yeah, outside of that, like I haven't played too much outside of that and like tried to really customize the website per se, because I inherited this website and the properties for the agency, and so I don't have to really built out too much like by hand,
Right.
which is um good and bad.
Yeah. Well,
But
I mean, like over time, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it'll take some time. But yeah, that's what I'm finding most interesting. It seems like Jekyll is very favored. And also all of not all, but a lot of the websites are on GitHub, so you can actually see like how these sites are built. And if you want to like poke around, like it's all there. Yeah.
Nice. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Um,
you're using a lot of Jekyll? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's Jekyll. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Both of my blogs are using Jekyll because I'm not really even sure that's the direction I went when I first started. And so I just kept going with it. And I feel like Jekyll, this is a Jekyll tangent. I love using Jekyll, but I feel like their documentation is terrible.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I keep hearing people that love Jekyll, they're like, but their community is great. So you can ask lots of questions and they'll get answered. But I just want to read it in the documentation. Just like explain this to me.
Right.
But also I've never like contributed to their documentation. So that's also something I should probably do instead of complaining about it.
I hear that. Yeah, I feel
kind of
that.
complain once in a while.
That's it. I'm done with
Um,
my Jekyll rant. Sorry.
oh man, I just that's very interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I've concentrated on the front end for my whole career, and so, but I've never worked with anything that have any external standards that anybody's looking at in the code. You know what I mean? We try to like be as like accessible as possible and all that stuff, but it's always just me that's doing those and enforcing it on myself or whatever, or any teammates that I'm working with. But it's never coming down from above. You know what I mean? And so that's like got to be a really interesting experience to be in that role.
Mhm.
And that's awesome that they are doing to open source stuff. That's really cool.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of open source projects from the government.
that's awesome. Yeah, that makes me like wonder. Yeah, just now, I always just assume that it's all like locked down and it's all whatever super
DARPA.
custom, DARPA static sites. But no, they're just open source using Jekyll.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
exactly.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's cool. Thank you for sharing about that. That I just find that really interesting.
Yeah.
What do you like best about your job?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna get kind of meta, but that I am at a federal agency. It feels like it completes like a cycle or something because my grandmother and my grandfather were both in the army, and my uncles were in like the army and Marines. My mom retired military, like retired Air Force. And so I grew up in the military family and always like had that like, "Ooh, am I gonna join the military or not? Or am I gonna be like a contractor or something?" And I always thought like, "Nah, that's not for me. Nah, that's not what I'm gonna do." And I'm here, like I'm a contractor now.
Awesome.
Like, so it's just like, oh wow, like familiar cycles are a thing.
That's
So,
such a
yeah.
great story. I
Yeah, that's
love
pretty cool.
that.
Yeah, yeah. It's so funny. Yeah, like, yeah, my mom retired, like, 2 months out from my 18th birthday. So, like, it's like, the military and, like, that connection is just, like, a part of my identity, and, like, I feel like that's something that, like, not too many people know. It's like, I'm, like, looking around right now, you can't see this, but, like, where I am right now, I grew up actually on the military base, like, it's probably, like, 5 miles away from my house, and I don't know, it's just a lot of, like, wow, like, I've always been aware of contractors and, like, just that relationship, but just now being on the other side and saying, like, "Oh, like, huh, this is how it works," and, like, I can also see, like, how intense it is to be in the military and, like, the sort of, like, expectations you have to fulfill that role. Like, I came into this job thinking, like, "Oh, like, now I can't, like, be late for my job or I can't, like, take take off work," because that's what I saw my mom, like, having to, like, um, I guess fulfill or, like, be secure in her job, but it's not like that at all. Like, I have a wonderful team that, like, respects work-life balance and, like, people have kids and, like, they understand, like, today's not the day, like, just come back tomorrow and it'll be okay, like, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's really deep, but yeah, that's my answer.
I like that. I mean, there's familiarity there, right? And then
Mhm.
there's comfort that comes with that. And when you're talking about taking on a new job, it's really nice to be able to have something like that where you can feel comfortable in some aspect of what you're doing.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, we're at just about time here. Is there any last piece of advice you have for our listeners who are prepping for interviews or leaving boot camps and about to discover the next stage of their journey?
Oh, that's okay. I could say so much, but and I hate to say like something trite, but like also like one, trust the process, and then two, you know more than you think. Like, eh, for example, I didn't know Jackal at all when I was interviewing for this job, but one, I reached out to my community. So if you need a community, find your community. VC's here, but there's also others. And then two, like do what you can, explain what you did and like your thought processes. And if it's not the fit, it's not a fit, but you will find your job and you can do it.
I love that. Trust the process.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much, Sadie, for being here with us today. We've grabbed all the links for the stuff that you dropped, including your blog post on technical test preparation advice, and we'll put those in the show notes. And so thanks for being here.
Yay,
Thanks,
you.
Sadie.
Thank y'all. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. This episode was produced by Dan Ott and Bekah Weigel. If you have questions or comments, you can hit us up on Twitter at virtualcoffee.io or email us at podcast@virtualcoffee.io. You can find the show notes, sign up for the newsletter, check out any of our other resources on our website, virtualcoffee.io. If you're interested in sponsoring Virtual Coffee, you can find out more information on our website at virtualcoffee.io/sponsorship. Please subscribe to our podcast and be sure to leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.